Take your seats and welcome. Welcome to everyone. My name's Kim Ellwood and I'm from the Office of Multicultural Interests, and I'd like to welcome you all to our final event for Harmony Week this year in 2018. Apologies for starting a bit late. We've got one more school still to come, so what we'll do is we'll start proceedings and then we'll let St Stephen's come in. So when they come in, we won't snigger at them or we'll just cheer them, okay? So make them feel really welcome. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Noongar people on which land we're here to gather today and offer my respects to elders past and present. This event is particularly relevant as we recognise the Aboriginal people as the first people of our nation. I'd like to see everyone cheer when I say what school they're from, because this is about you guys today. So I'm just going to call out and welcome all our schools today. So we've got Ashdale Secondary School here. Where are you guys sitting? There we go. Okay, Balladura, you can do better than that. Where's Balladura sitting? Oh. Where is, I can see them, Churchland Senior High School. That's getting better. Where's Iona? Iona here? Oh, there's a few girls there. We'll help you later, okay? Where's Melville Senior High School? Are you here, Melville? Excellent. Good work. Mount Lawley Senior High. That's better. Shenton College. Do we have Shenton here yet? No. Oh, sorry, no Shenton. And we've got Edith Cowan University. I'd also like to make special thank you and welcome to our special guests that are here today, as well as our partnering with our universities that come along to be our judges. So thank you. I just want to quickly tell you, what is the Office of Multicultural Interests? What are we? We call ourselves OMI, and I just sort of let you know that we are state government. We work as part of the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries, and our role as the Office of State Government is really to work with community, promote multiculturalism, and stuff that's a bit more tangible. We give out grants, we work with our community language schools, and we run programs such as this. And some of you guys might have been to festivals, if anyone been to Diwali or Chinese New Year. So that's the sort of stuff as state government we get to get ourselves involved in. So it's great to have you all here. But I am going to now introduce you to Barry McGuire. He's going to give a welcome to country. Barry McGuire is a Balladong Noongar man and he's a strong advocate for people and culture. So I'm going to welcome you up to the stage, please, Barry.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here to speak at a Welcome to Country. But before I start, Mount Lawley, good school. Sorry, everybody. I went to Mount Lawley, and we used to win a lot of football games. Can't walk anymore because of that, so good to see you. I guess diversity, since the start of time on this continent, we as Aboriginal people, we have been diverse something like crazy. There's so many hundreds of nations that is here. And yes, we gathered. And when we gathered, there was always a welcome to country about the balance, a balance between us that we should be able to share each other's understanding of life, understanding of cultural obligations. How do we relate to each other? How do we marry in? How do we bring an understanding to have strong offspring inside of the understanding of our skin system that relates to the environment? And how do we stay as one with the environment? You see, we have a tree here that came from the Bunya Mountains in the Supreme Court Gardens. It's well over 700 years old. For a man to come from Queensland, run with a message stick of invitation. And on that marking, it spoke to all the nations that he crossed, inviting them back to a great ceremony well over 700 years ago. This tree is still standing there. And there's trees that come off it that run through the understanding of law and customary running here in the Whadjuk country. You see, so to understand how do we exist with other nations, we must adhere to each other's way of life. And way back then, the diversity was crazy. There were so many of us. I have a grandfather that speaks 24 languages today, standing in the Pilbara. And when the men and women come, he can speak in their language. 24 languages. 24 languages. How do you find the vibration of another man's land and allow that to live inside of you. You share. You share with the start of a smile. You as young people can make a change for this world. You as young people can understand who each other is. What is the echoes of your ancestors? What are the echoes of your culture? Yes, we're all Australian, but that's just a word. Respect the fact and where you come from. Respect your old people. Without them, you would not be here. You would not be here. So teach each other about each other's way of life, and find out, if you don't even know yours, find out about it and bring it forth, let it live inside of you. Because diversity and this way of life, if we don't allow our culture to live, we will never be heard. We will never be balanced as a nation. We will never be balanced. Understand the fact in who you are, where you come from, your ancestors, no matter how far back. I've got Irish blood in me, and it goes back to a little castle in the McGuire County over in Northern Ireland, and that's where the McGuires come from. And that's where I come from too. But I've been here in my blood since the world was soft. So we can live within ourselves with the different many blood nations that we represent, and you will have that. Recognize it. Hold it up. Be proud of your ancestors. Diversity. We must look at it. Look at it here. Because it's beautiful to see many nations sitting here as one today. And may my grandmothers and my grandfathers in that energy come to sit with you. And may that boilba, that energy also heal you and keep you safe because of the land in which you're on. So welcome to the Whadjuk lands. I am honoured and I am blessed to stand here with you and share in the first language that is here. That language is still vibrating because we are still standing. You never know. In several years to come, or several generations to come, my grandson or my granddaughter standing to do a welcome for that generation might not even look like me. But because the vibration of language that sits upon their tongue, it's allowed. So thank you for having me here. And a welcome to country, when you hear another welcome to country, it's about how do we create a balance between each other. I wish you all the best for your debate today. I wish you all the best for your future in the way that you walk in this world. And I hope that you carry each other's understanding and stories so that we can create a better world. I'm glad that my old people's language can rest upon your ears today. And may I share in this old song of gathering. And it's a very special old song. It's of the Spider's Dreaming, which belongs to King's Park. And may that, the web itself, come and make you strong as schools, but as people when you walk and you touch each other in the years to come. Wanare gamalana, boyongoda waningo, wanare gamalana, boyongoda waningo, wanare gamalana, boyongoda waningo. Boyongoda waningo wanare gamalana boyongoda waningo. That old song, if you think about several hundred men singing that down on Elizabeth Quay before Elizabeth Quay was. Several hundred men. There was a little house in King Street. And in that house, they found a letter that they put into authorities of the day. And inside the letter was a certain section that said, "We have boarded up our doors, we have boarded up our windows, for the natives have been singing all night. If you find this letter and we are gone, they have eaten us." The mindset of people back then to how we as people today, you as young people, can make a change. The young people over the years made a change. They saw the differences in the way that we can stand as human beings in our own rights. And you can do it too. Thank you for coming and touching on a subject that needs to be spoken about. But hold what you learned today and take it into the world, because it's a must for all of us, no matter where we come from. God bless, stay safe, and travel well when you become who you will become. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. And every time I hear him speak, I've heard him do quite a few welcome to countries. It just sends shivers down my spine, and it makes me appreciate where we are and what we've got today. All right, we're going to let one of the schools in, I believe. We're just going to give it a minute before we introduce AMC for today, while we welcome one of our last schools in today. Is this St Stephen's coming in? Beautiful, welcome. Welcome you here for the good bits now. Here we go. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our MC for today. We are extremely lucky to be partnering with SBS, and I would like to introduce you to Carl Brown, who is our SBS correspondent, and he'll introduce himself, but just a huge warm welcome to Carl, who's going to take us through today.
Oh, thank you, Kim, and thank you, Barry, for that wonderful welcome to country. So, morning, folks. Thanks for coming to the 2018 Harmony Week debate. I'm Carl Brown. I'm the WA correspondent for SBS, so I'm the guy you see running around with the camera with no one else. I'm originally from Perth myself, and I've worked for a number of news organisations around the world, including our ABC and the BBC. Now, I think it's time we introduce our panellists, so could you please give a lovely warm welcome for all our panellists today. Now, before we do get things underway, we do have to do a bit of housekeeping. I know, really exciting. Toilets located in the foyer. If you need to go, you need to go. Go. The emergency exits are located to the right of the stage and at the back. There are no safety slides, don't rush. Very unlikely we'll use them, of course. And if you do start to nod off, I'd like to tell you we've got Red Bull. We don't. Sorry. Moving on. Can I get a show of hands for anyone who's watched anything on SBS? Now, this can be anything. This could be one of our international language shows, an anime, maybe the news. All right. Now, as I'm pretty sure you're aware, we're pretty diverse, right? Yeah? So, SBS stands for the Special Broadcasting Service, and we were set up in 1980 to deliver content that reflects the multicultural society we now live in. Now, part of our charter is to promote understanding and acceptance of our diverse society. Put simply, we want to see everyone living here, regardless of where your roots are, enjoying, embracing all the different cultures that make up Australian life. Now, this of course means we do talk about things like inequalities such as racism, discrimination and sexism, and how it can affect our life, and obviously what we're going to be discussing today. Now, a few years back, SBS set up a website aimed at you guys. It's called SBS Learn. I know, not the most exciting name we could think of. I'm sure they're going to rebrand that at some point, but hear me out. SBS Learn is meant to be a resource for students and teachers to help discuss multicultural and societal issues. And it's meant to be through the classroom with TV shows and interactive workshops. Basically, it means you get to watch an interesting TV show in class and then talk about it afterwards, which I think is a bit better than going, oh, turn to page 42 of your book. Now, for the teachers here, this is free to use, and it comes with prepared teaching resources as well, making it a bit easier for you guys to integrate it into your teaching plan. It's something SBS has become really passionate about, and we'd love to get more schools involved in it. Now, that's enough about what we do at SBS, because what we really need to talk about here is today's debate topic. So this is the second time we've had a debate for Harmony Week, and each year it's on the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. That day was created by the United Nations in 1966 after a mass racial shooting in South Africa known as the Sharpeville Massacre. Now, this isn't obviously a lovely light topic. This was got back during the apartheid era, where the government was severely restricting the rights of black South Africans and decided anyone who was not white needed a passbook if they wanted to go anywhere. Now, this is essentially like needing a passport to go to the shops or to pop into the city or to see a friend. And the government at the time was using it to segregate the country. On March 21st, 1960, a peaceful protest against the use of these passbooks was organised, and this was outside a police station in the town of Sharpeville. No one at the protest had a weapon, and after a stone was thrown, the soldiers fired into the crowd of 20,000 people for 40 seconds with machine guns. It ended with almost 70 people being killed. 10 of them were kids younger than you, shot in the back as they ran away. It sent the country into an uproar, as you can imagine. Riots, protests, assaults, and it led to the creation of armed resistance groups against the government. That fighting didn't stop until the 90s, when Nelson Mandela became president. Now, Harmony Day was started here in WA in 1998, and they chose the same date because of the significance it has to racial discrimination and unity. For a little while, we were the only state that bothered to do Harmony Day, but the rest of the country joined us in 2000. In 2003, though, we changed the game again and turned it into Harmony Week. Now, this was because a lot of groups here felt it was a bit inappropriate to celebrate unity on the day of a mass racially biased shooting. So now we have 6 days of celebration and 1 day of commemoration of the innocent lives who were lost due to racism. Because of that, today's topic is going to be quite challenging. After both teams have argued their points, we'll have a discussion on the debate, and you guys will get a chance to obviously share any comments you want to make. We'll have our mic minions running around, just flag them down, we'll have a chat. We're going to be debating whether cultural diversity is a threat to the Australian way of life. Now, please keep in mind that the arguments presented here today don't necessarily represent the views of our panellists. This is the role they've been given, and they've researched it to their utmost abilities. As I'm sure you can imagine, debating a topic like this is a pretty full-on experience for them, so please make them feel welcome and hold on to your comments till we can get a mic to you. Sound good? Yep, awesome. So, we need to do the team introductions. So we'll start with Team 1, who are arguing that cultural diversity is not a threat to the Australian way of life. And I'm sorry, Bella, I am going to get your surname wrong. So first, let's introduce Team Captain Bella Nadiazike. Hadi Rahimi. And Sarah Khaber, who is filling in. Sarah is filling in for Habibi Yassim, who unfortunately was not able to attend today. On Team 2, arguing that cultural diversity is a threat to the Australian way of life, we have Team Captain Alice Leggett. Ahmed Ademoglu. And Jasmine Levine. Now, our judging panel has experts from our 5 universities, and I've studied at 4 of them because I'm not a very good student. So please welcome Dr. Justine Dandy from Edith Cowan, Dr. Yiga Waldy-Yes from Curtin University, Associate Professor Dawn Darlaston-Jones from Notre Dame, Associate Professor Farida Fosdar from UWA, and Miss Jordan Payne from Murdoch University. Now, we do need to clap for 2 more people. I know you're going to get really sick of clapping today, so I'll try and keep it to a minimum. We need to thank our 2 team support experts who've been working with our panellists to develop their arguments. Team 1's Sarah Gerber, who is filling in on the panel today, and Team 2's Kim Smith, who's on the far end. So here's how the debate's going to run. Panellists are going to get 4 minutes each to present their argument, with the final panellist on each team getting 5 minutes to sum up. The bell will indicate when they have 1 minute left to talk. After the debate, the judging panel will decide the winning team, and the audience will be asked to vote on who they think is the winning team. The judges will be scoring the teams in the following areas: whether they have a clear knowledge of the topic area, how well they place the debate in a wider social and political context and demonstrate an awareness of the opposing positions on the issue, how well they present a well-structured and clear argument that uses good evidence, how well they demonstrate intellectual flexibility and individually respond to the different lines of argument rather than continually re-emphasising one point, and whether the speakers are able to think on their feet and rebut the opposing team to reinforce their case. And just so everyone's aware, the debate and what we're talking about today is being recorded and live streamed, mostly so they have a reason not to bring me next year. So, shall we get started? All right, I'd like to invite Sarah Gerber from Team 1 to get us started. This is Team 1 who are arguing that cultural diversity is not a threat to the Australian way of life.
Hello everyone. Actually, I'm going to come up. Microphone. Okay, so yeah, my name is Sarah Gerber, and I'd like to start by thanking everybody for coming today, to my opponents and my team, good luck. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the local Indigenous people, the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting upon today. To begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about Australia's history. Did you know that Australia has been a multicultural country since the existence of our nation's first people? Dating back to 50,000 years, there has been between 250 and 400 different languages spoken between different Indigenous communities. So Australian culture is multiculturalism. Okay, now that we've covered a little bit of the history, I'd like to break down today's topic. So first of all, what is cultural diversity? So my definition of cultural diversity is that it's when people from different places around the world with different backgrounds, values, attitudes, beliefs and traditions try to come together and live harmoniously. Okay, now on to threat. The term threat is a little bit vague. I mean, it can be interpreted in many ways. When considering threat, one must consider what an individual or a nation can lose. When I think of what can be taken from me, I think of my physical health, I think of my home and shelter, I think of my money and my belongings, and my identity. Okay, lastly, a quick definition on the Australian way of life. So when I think of what it means to be Australian, I think of strong, supportive families, honest, loyal friendships, and freedom to be myself and to be respected for that. Being able to trust and rely on my neighbour, and knowing that with hard and honest work, that I will be provided the opportunities to follow my dreams. What is so wonderful about this, what I've just described, is that there's actually a form given to each and every migrant that moves to Australia that pretty much outlines exactly what I imagine that Australian life should be. You can find this document on the Australian government website if you would like to look it up. So, is culture diversity stripping Australia of its health, land, money and identity? Well, my team and I will explain to you why it isn't. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go over some ways that cultural diversity is strengthening the Australia's economics. So, One in 3 small Australian businesses are run by migrants. That means that 1.41 million, sorry, it's a big number, of people are getting jobs from these small businesses. And you know what is really awesome about these small businesses is that 25% of these businesses are training young people, compared to only 19% of non-migrant businesses. So that means when all of you guys, you know, when you're in school or when you're graduating, you have a strong foundation for starting your careers. You've got people who have dedicated their time and energy into their education and into their businesses to help you guys in the future. And okay, so moving on from this, I'd just like to round off with a quick example of a personal example. So my family moved here from South Africa. We had nothing at all, besides our suitcases. My dad was a skilled migrant, so we built ourselves up from absolutely nothing, and he's been able to, in Australia, from the opportunities that it's provided, give back to Australia and be able to look after us as well, as long as with my mum working as well. So he actually works in the Pilbara in a construction company, working with Indigenous communities, helping build. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, everyone, and yeah, good luck to everybody else.
Thank you, Sarah. Now, I'd like to invite Team 2's Jasmine Levine to present. Now, Team 2 are arguing that cultural diversity is a threat to the Australian way of life.
Can you all hear me? Is that okay? Good morning, everyone. I'd like to wish you all a very happy Harmony Week and thank you all for being here. As you can imagine, the affirming team of this debate is quite a challenging position to be in. So I'm going to begin by breaking down the assumptions that are associated with the words cultural diversity and the Australian way of life. Some groups of people living in Australia may feel as though they are excluded from both of these terms. When you think of cultural diversity, what comes to mind? People of different cultures living side by side, taking part in their own cultures and also accepting others, right? Let's think for a minute which group of people living in Australia might feel left out or marginalised by this concept. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people might feel as though this term, cultural diversity, doesn't make room for them, the original custodians of this land, the land in which all of these cultures are ideally happily living side by side. This is the cultural diversity that caused the stolen generations, the diversity that has resulted in a near genocide of land, culture and population of Aboriginal people. And now I'd like to break down this term, Australian way of life, with the inclusion and acknowledgement of Aboriginal people. Think back to a time before colonisation. Australia is one of the most culturally diverse places on the planet. Hundreds of different Aboriginal nations span across the country with their own languages and laws, making up the original version of the Australian way of life. Sorry. Now, fast forward to 1788. Another cultural group finds this vast and abundant land and threatens and attempts to extinguish the already existing Australian way of life that has been thriving for over 60,000 years. 200 years on, when Aboriginal people did have more of a voice in the form of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC, it was abolished by the Howard government in 2005, arguably out of fear that it would threaten political status quo and have an eventual effect on the Australian way of life as we knew it. Fast forward again to 2018. Australia looks like a very multicultural nation. People come here from all over the globe with different skin colours, different beliefs, different clothes and different languages. However, the Australian way of life requires everyone to speak English, to go to Australian schools, to get Australian jobs. The Australian way of life has the power to force people to distance themselves from their cultures, to neglect their origins and to integrate into a society where the dominant culture is, quite frankly, not as diverse as we would like to think. When you ask someone who was born here but their parents' families migrated from other countries, what nationality do they say they are? Australian. When you've lived in Australia for most of your life, like myself, but you weren't born here, what nationality do you say you are? Australian. Whether I agree with this notion or not, the Australian way of life is threatened by cultural diversity, in the sense that there are very little cultures that are truly and authentically allowed to reflect the place that they have come from, speak the language that they were raised on, practice the customs that they were taught from birth. The Australian way of life is threatened by the cultural diversity that the owners of this land, the first people of this nation, have to offer. The Australian way of life is represented by a square. If you happen to be a triangle or a circle or a star, and you don't force yourself into this square, you are a threat to this way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. Now it's time to hear again from Team 1. It's Hadi Rahimi.
Let's take off the mic. Okay. Hello, everyone. To start with, I'd like to say greetings in different languages. Assalamu alaikum, khush amadid, salam, marhaba, namaste, jai Shri Krishna, good day, hello, yambu, and hoi khandit. My name is Hadi Rahimi, and I'm a Bachelor of Social Work student at Curtin University. An overview of Australian history in his own uniqueness of key components such as indigenous population, past British colonization, and recent threads of extensive immigration from different countries and cultures. Cultural diversity, including the resurgence of a strong Aboriginal presence, identity presents challenging issues for Australia, relationship between national and personal identities while working cohesive with diverse forces in multicultural society. Every culture has its own forms and flavors. We can't change the history. It's not the current history of Australia. Australia is based on multiculturalism. Cultural diversity is a way that we embrace communities who live with harmony and share the place, willingness to contribute in making Australia home. And as said by Minister for Citizenship and Multicultural Interests, Paul Papalia, we can't continue to draw on that, making our culture calendar more exciting, our ways of thinking more innovative, our skills more varied, and our free enterprise more successful. To further validate my argument, I'm going to be doing an activity. Can I get everyone from the audience, every kid or every high school kids, to stand up, please? Nice to get those bloods going into those parts. We're going to be doing an activity together. Everyone is included. Sit down if your parents are born in this country. If they are not born in this country, you can keep standing. Sit down if one of your parents are born in this country. Fascinating. Sit down if you think that your grandfather or your grandmother was born in this country. Sit down if you think your grandfather or your grandmother was born in this country. Awesome. So reflecting on the outcome of this activity, we have just seen that how culturally diverse our audience are. A quick demonstration of reflecting on this outcome also shows that a recent statistics by Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2016, 28.5% of Australian estimated resident population, that is 6.9 million people, were born overseas. I'd like to thank you for taking part in this activity. You can sit down now. Thank you. When the affirmative team argues about being culturally diverse is a threat, what do you consider dehumanization of the humankind? The violation to the Racial Discrimination Act, and a total violation to the basic human rights of people seeking asylum. One of the personal stories of a young Hazara person from a community who lives in Mount Barker. There's about 200 Hazara people living there. He came here in 2001, spent 3 months in a Curtin detention center in Kimberley region. And Mr. Heather lived in Mount Barker, that is about 370 kilometers down in Albany. And recently, 2014, he was ready to finally get his steps towards building his life in Australia. He opened his own martial arts school in Mount Barker. In his words, he said, "I decided to share this one back with the community. Now I'm working hard most of the time, 7 days a week." The Rainbow Coast Neighborhood Center CEO Angela Bristow said, "Many Hazara have been settled there for a number of years. They have started their own businesses, are able to help the newcomers. We are still seeing people arrive from Afghanistan." And as Sarah mentioned, according to CGU Australian Migrant Small Businesses Report 2018, 1/3 of small Australian businesses are run by migrants. At least that is 620,000 businesses. Happy Harmony, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hadi. Now, back over to Team 2 with Alice Lagarde.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? I would like to thank you, Hadi, and I would like to say that I appreciate your position, and while I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, I would just like to suggest that it's important to be critical of notions that we take for granted, like cultural diversity. And I would like to begin my portion of the debate by quoting Hage's 1998 book, White Nation. Diversity is a white word. It seeks to make sense of difference through the white lens by creating understandable definitions of diversity only in relation to what this means in terms of whiteness. What's meant by this is that in the context of Australia and this debate, white people still have linguistic and structural ownership of this country, despite Indigenous peoples being the true custodians of the land in the past, today, and forever. Our team's point is that regardless of what we believe, cultural diversity is clearly a threat to the Australian way of life, as it remains a white concept only truly accessible to white Australians. Despite how far we may have come, we still exist within a system of norms, and any deviation from these norms labels you as an other. I'm not doubting the range of diverse linguistic, cultural communities in this country and their valuable contributions. I am arguing that, at its core, cultural diversity and associated practices of understanding, empathy, and unity in difference are threatening to the Australian way of life. It's a way of life built on the colonisation, genocide, and forced removal of Indigenous children from their families and community. It's a way of life built on the systematic oppression of non-white individuals and communities, culminating in the White Australia policy, which wasn't that long ago, by the way. And lastly, it's a way of life built on the trusting of powerful white men and the mistrusting of other voices. If Australia and the powerful people who run it were not threatened by cultural diversity, why do we still have innocent, legitimate refugees locked up in offshore detention centres and not what a submission before the International Criminal Court calls a crime against humanity? Why are we so concerned with policing how vulnerable religions and ethnic minorities live their everyday lives? They're seen as a threat to real Aussies, the status quo, the norm, the way things are and have been for many years. And lastly, why do we still celebrate our National Day on January 26, the date that colonisers planted the British flag to mark their invasion of Indigenous land, and not on a day where everyone in this vast country can join together in unity? Arguably, our very not diverse government are threatened by cultural diversity because of the sheer number of practices and policies that stifle it. I'm not arguing that cultural diversity is wrong or bad, just that it threatens the very core ideas of Australianness, built on a long history of excluding diverse voices from the conversation. You may ask then, well, how are we having this conversation? How do I see so many diverse people around me? Well, Australia is, on paper, a multicultural nation, but just by scratching under the surface, we can see the disparity between what is on paper and people's actual lived experiences. Even without multiculturalism, to be truly accepted, you still have to fit within certain Aussie boundaries. These boundaries are dictated by institutions like the media, government, and education system, and affect whether we feel like we actually truly belong. Essentially, I believe that cultural diversity is indeed a threat to the Australian way of life, judging by this country's reluctance to acknowledge its oppressive past and present and actively work for fairer treatment of all individuals. Yes, we have a degree of multiculturalism right now, but prevailing issues of racism and bigotry in this country suggest that Australia is not yet committed to and is indeed threatened by cultural diversity. For this, there must be change. On that note, I would like to finish by quoting the ever-critical Lisa Simpson, in that the whole damn system is wrong.
Thank you, Alice. Now it's time for each of our teams to give their summaries from each side. First up is Team 1. It's Bella Nidakise. I got that wrong again, didn't I? Oh, yeah. Please welcome Bella.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for being here to learn and also grow. Thank you to our opponents for the healthy debate and to my teammates for the preparation and support. I would firstly like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which we are meeting on, the Whadjuk people. I wish to acknowledge and respect their contribution to continuing culture and contributions they make to the life of this city and region. My name is Bella. I'm a youth programs coordinator at the Edmund Rice Centre. Came from Burundi. I was born in Burundi during the war, so I came to Australia as a refugee. For a long time as human beings, we have fought wars, internal battles, including the biggest issue we all face as young people in modern society today, mental health. Today is the 21st of March, National Harmony Day or Week, which coincides, as our good friend said here, with the United Nations International Day of Elimination of Racial Discrimination. This day reminds people of the negative consequences of racial discrimination, but it also encourages people to remember their obligation to combat racial discrimination in all its forms. As human beings, we are all entitled to human rights without discrimination, no matter of our race, gender, and religions. Australia is very proud of its sporting heritage. If we are to continue being a powerhouse in sport around the world, cultural diversity is key. Of the 10 top male soccer players, because I'm a sport person, in the world, 6 are from Europe and 4 are from South America. Nine of them are from non-English speaking countries. Also, of the top sprinters in the world, 5 are from Jamaica, 6 from the United States, 2 from Canada, 1 from Trinidad, and 1 from Nigeria. All of them are of African origin. The list goes on, and so some of us as young people look to the likes of Usain Bolt, Messi, Ronaldo, particularly Michelle Cowan, I would like to mention, who is born in South Africa and is now the head coach of the Fremantle Dockers women's team. Oh, that sounds better. Women's side. You see, cultural diversity brings to Australia people with passion from all sports. It brings coaches with diverse knowledge from all over the world. It is only a way to ensure we grow as a nation. Now, facts. Did you know our universities in Australia exist or are powered by international students? As the money they provide to Australia improves the education and facilities of universities. Universities in Australia is Australia's fourth largest service industry export. Australia gained $17 billion in 2015 alone from international students. That's massive. Now, my components mentioned media, and that's media, some medias, not to mention SBS, sorry, media perpetrates wrong perceptions of different cultures and so on. We are working to close the gap, and that is why we've got a reconciliation plan. And our current government is based on different ethnicities, and everybody is slowly getting on board. I also like to mention, you guys listen to Beyonce and Drake, right? Okay, so, or maybe Eminem, recently Ed Sheeran. Are they all Australian? They're from different ethnicities, right? Well, what if I told you that we're able to follow these artists on radio, on CM, here in Australia? Cultural diversity is, sorry, I must rush it. I'm going to go to my last piece, sorry. All right, so yesterday, just off the record, yesterday was the United Nations International Day of Happiness. I was pleased to read in the World Happiness Report briefly that Australia is in the top 10 most happiest countries in the world. This report talked a lot about migration, which brings cultural diversity. For Australia, we appreciate cultural diversity, and it's a part of what makes Australia great. I'm sure we all enjoy company of a good mate who brings something new in our life. I'd like to close by saying cultural diversity prepares you as young people to be global citizens. Events such as Harmony Week today and Refugee Week and Multicultural Round in Sport, which I've participated in put our many cultures on display. This gives young people a taste of cultures around the world and teaches them to appreciate and respect those cultures. If you wish to travel the world, you must know how to behave respectfully in all different cultures, including being an Australian, recognizing the Aboriginal people. And for that, you need cultural diversity. Diversity is the way to prepare you as young people to face the world, and nowhere is that important than in the world's most isolated city, which is Perth, right here. Happy Harmony Day, thank you.
You stole my notes. You stole my notes.
Sorry.
You see, I knew when I printed 10 pages that was going to happen. Now, thank you, Bella, of course. And our final panellist for today, Teams 2's Ahmed Adamagolu. Please give him a round welcome.
Actually, you know what? I'll take it there. Thank you. Right, there we lost the pen. Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed. I'm an international student. I'm from Turkey. Been here for 6 years. So I appreciate the comments and the arguments that our opposing team have brought. Great arguments. But Bella, why do those idols that you mentioned have to be successful to be respected? Right. So I would like to mention that we also have different cultures amongst us. I'll give an example. Why did it take so long for us to accept marriage equality? Almost 40% of the population still sees as a threat to the dominant culture of being heterosexual. Also, we still have sexism in the workplace, meaning that the male-dominated workplace culture is threatened by the woman entering the workforce, getting equal pay, competing for leadership positions. Also, we can't forget that it wasn't long ago our ever first female prime minister was subjected to unjust abuse, and as she threatened male-dominant political culture. Coming back to the ethnic groups, do we have enough representation of world's culture amongst us, or is it just a tool for us? Do we sprinkle some of that background and some of that background here for our own benefits, like trade and jobs from other countries? Also, our immigration process still chooses the ones who can adapt themselves easily in the country, and makes it very difficult for those who seems to be too different. For example, if you look at the stats, Christian immigrants outnumber other religious group immigrants. This shows that Christian faith are preferred as they support the dominant culture's main faith, not threaten it. Cultural diversity is seen as a threat to the authentic Australian way of life because none of us are Indigenous and we call ourselves Australians. Cultural diversity is clearly seen as a threat because we still don't have enough Indigenous representation in government, as we have seen in the ATSIC example. If we are that democratic and diverse, why don't we have enough representation of people from other cultures and communities in the government? We have less than 3% non-European background people in the government. Or do we also see them as a threat? Let's look at an example from the history. What happened to Ottoman Empire? Ottoman extended to 3 continents, with the world's 22% of the world's all land. It was a golden era for cultural diversity. Every diverse community was able to live freely with their own customs and backgrounds. It lived for more than 600 years. It closed and opened the historical age, and it came to an end only 96 years ago, not that long. Look what happened to Ottoman. It is 20 different countries now. People want to have their own governments and rulings, and we are all separated into different countries. Another point is the cultural assimilation. I'm referring to Milton Gordon's cultural integration model. For example, if we stop migration now, 5 generations later, will there be any cultural diversity? Or are we just going to have an homogeneous group? Because even 5 generations earlier, we identified ourselves differently, and now we identify ourselves as Australians. If we stop migration, maybe 5 generations later, all of us will be Australians, And of course, there will be no threat to Australian way of life because it will be us. If we open our doors fully to any immigrants and without any immigration rules or biases towards certain cultures that are compatible with Australian way of life, then we may divide into 20 different countries like Ottoman. Cultural diversity is a threat to Australian way of life because clearly Australia feels threatened. Also, our team members, we were born in 3 different countries. We were raised with 3 different way of lives, with different languages and religion. But at the end, we have all adapted the Australian way of life because we all speak English and lost some of our authenticity. We have all adapted this way of life because the idea of us living in here by reserving our customs are seen as a threat. In conclusion, I appreciate how our team represented our idea, regardless of our personal thoughts, because it's quite contrary for me to be an international student and defend this thought. For me, the best skill is to truly challenge yourself with something you haven't done before. Before I drop the mic, I'm not going to do it. When was the last time you waved that neighbor from China? When was the last time you shared your lunch with that Indian boy? When was the last time you smiled to a lady with a hijab? When was the last time you truly, from your heart, asked your teacher, how are you? Or to your bus driver, or to your friend, and yourself. How are you? Are you gentle? Are you kind? Are you thoughtful? Are you welcoming? Can you welcome us? Thank you.
Well, we've had some pretty powerful arguments today, haven't we? So that wasn't obviously a very easy topic, so can we please get one last big round of applause for all of our panellists today? Now, this next part is all about you guys. And I know we've probably got a lot of you who want to actually say something today, so I'm hoping we'll have a chance to get to everyone. Now, I'm pretty sure we've got 8 different educational institutions here, and it would be awesome to hear from you, all of you. I realise that Kim stole my thunder on this one, but I wasn't in the room, so we're going to do it again. So let's check where everyone's sitting. I'll get you guys to yell out because my eyesight's rubbish. Where is Ashdale Secondary? Yeah? Awesome. You're up the back right, yeah? Yeah? All right. Ballajura? Oh, a lot of Ballajura. Churchlands? Right. Iona? Is it not very exciting, Iona? Come on. Where's Melville? Yeah? Oh, awesome. Oh, bit of bias from our panel here. Wow. Where's Mount Lawley, actually? You guys over there? St. Stephens? Stevens. You were late, come on. And where's ECU? Is that embarrassing for you guys? Come on. All right, so I do have a question. Who was cheering for every school? Because there was someone. There she is. Alrighty, so you've probably spotted our mic minions. They're going to be sneaking around the audience, and no matter what they say, do not give them a banana. If you want to have your say on the debate, chuck up your hand, and when we get to you, just start with your name, what school you're with, and we'll go from there. So, mic minions, have we got our first question or statement? Anyone? Well, that's embarrassing. We have got one. Yes! All right.
Hello? Sorry, does that work?
Yep.
Sorry, can't really hear. My name is Jack Costello. I'm from Churchlands. I'd like to address this question mostly to the affirming team, although both teams did present very good arguments, and I'm thankful for both of presenting them. So I'd just like to ask, mostly the affirming team, you've raised an important issue over the integration of various cultures into Australian society, and there are deep philosophical and moral issues related to that. But on a practical level, do you think in the oncoming generations, perhaps to affect our children or their children, or even within our lifetimes, that there will be a concerted effort made by any government, particularly our own, on a multilateral level, to improve or even to disallow cultural immigration? Do you think there will be any action made, or whether we will just continue this sort of trend of stagnation which most countries have continued for the last couple of decades? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. You're very articulate. That's pretty awesome. I just wanted to say that I don't think Australia's immigration policies are going to change radically in any way over the next few generations, just because the Australian dominant way of approaching immigration has been this way for a very long time. They have been threatened by they've felt threatened by other cultures for a very long time, and I think it's going to take a long time for those attitudes to change. And so I think for the kind of foreseeable next few decades, there's going to be still a degree of toughness of Australia's immigration policies, because there still is that kind of sense of being threatened. But hopefully things do change, but I do think that it will take a while. Thank you.
Sorry, my hair is... Have we got any other questions or statements you'd like to make, guys? Come on, the floor is yours. Like, you're very rarely going to get an opportunity like this. I know that sounds a bit odd, but go over here.
Hi, I'm Freddie Ann. I'm from Balladura Community College, and my question is for Ahmed. You said that cultural diversity is a threat to the Australian way of life, and that we now refer to ourselves as Australian. Our identity, is everything. It's our name. It's how we look like. So you're obviously not Australian. So are you saying your name, your appearance is a threat to the Australian way of life?
Amen.
Because you do not look like an Australian, so.
Amen. Amen.
Sorry, what was your name?
Freddie Ann.
Okay, look, it's a great point. It is true, and during my time period here, I wasn't, most people thought I was Australian because the way I look. But it is, for example, the example that I gave was, so 5 generations ago, we only had authentic indigenous people here, and basically they were Australians. And then after we had some white flow, then we had a government, and now we call, themselves as like Australians. And so I'm wondering that those people who came to the country after indigenous people, so they became Australian, right? So there is that vibe, for example, that after 5 generations, then whoever comes, those migrants, there's a big chance that they might be Australians too. So their children, so will basically adapt themselves. So it's sort of like we have our own, background and habits and, for example, customs. I'll give you an example. We are not fully able to, do our own culture here. One day I went to pray, so we have Friday prayer. There's a place that we pray all the time. So I went there. I go every Friday, and one day the doors were shut. So for us in Islamic culture, you never shut a door of a mosque because it's really rude, and we always welcome people to come in and pray, regardless of their religion. And I asked the person who was shutting the door, I said, why are we shutting this door? And he said, oh, the government has a new policy now, and they limit the amount of people who can pray. And they didn't allow us to get inside. Yeah. So there are some ways that we can't fully, there are some restrictions, just like language, just like other customs of our culture, and things like this as well. Yeah, thank you.
We might let Team 1 have a bit of a chat as well.
Mic is not working. Oh, here it is. I have a question for you. Are you Muslim or? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to make
Did I become a threat now?
No, we don't consider any of you guys to be a threat for in any way or shape or form. Nothing like that. But when you talk about the history, I don't know if it's in your knowledge, the Muslim Cameleers, have you got a knowledge about Muslims, Australian Muslims, Muslim indigenous, they got married, they were here first because they came on camels, and we had Chinese indigenous in the past decades, and they were contributing to the economy. They were there to live in Australian way of life. And you say you go to the mosque on Fridays, there is no racial discrimination on the basis of everyone is invited, everyone is included. When you say that our depending on the context we live in, the Australian life that we live, it is based on diversity and the freedom that you can have access to different parts of Australia. If there are certain restrictions, which means that it will create a boundary that will restrict people's abilities to better contribute, to better share their knowledge, to better share their culture, customs, hospitality, food, cuisine, conversation, values, strong moral values, and all of those things really takes a crucial part when you're trying to live an Australian way of life. Only speaking English or only going to the mosque on Fridays doesn't make you like a pure Australian. There are many other ways that you can contribute to the Australian way of life. And as a classic example, like I consider myself, I'm a permanent resident. I'm not a citizen, but I consider myself to be a perfect Australian. I work, I contribute, I work for the youth people. We do consultation. I do consultation with many young organizations, and we are working towards making Australia based on multiculturalism. We share the platform, we share the knowledge, we share our ethnicities, we share our customs, and we are proud of being a multicultural society.
Just a quick comment. You actually didn't answer the question. You know that. Whether your name, your question was what exactly? Something to do with his name, whether it was a threat?
Yeah, because he said it's cultural diversity. Your identity is your culture. Your name is not Australian. Mm-hmm. So he's saying your name, is that a threat to the Australian way of life?
You didn't answer that. You're going to answer it? Are you a threat? Sorry, it's a serious question because we all have diversity, so.
Yeah, well, not essentially, because just a name or a name of religion or a name of culture, I don't think it's a threat. If they are not here, for example, if they are not in the country, Bella, so if they are, let's say, they are good to us as long as we are not out of our comfort zone. For example, great, Chinese culture, perfect. Indian culture, yeah, I eat curry. And you've given an example of the camels, but by the way, those camels were transferred here because the horses were dying in the desert, so they needed camels, and they moved those camels here for our own benefit. So why don't we open our doors and allow everybody to come into country then?
All right,
Let's not forget that we're at part of a debate where we are arguing one side. We don't necessarily believe all of this, and we don't necessarily carry this through our lives. We are three different cultures. We are seen as threats in three different ways to the Australian way of life. We're not saying that we feel that cultural diversity is a threat, but it is definitely seen as a threat based on all of the things that we have said. Not necessarily that we feel as though it's bad or that it shouldn't happen or that we should close our doors, because then none of us would be here, like you say, contributing to this amazing culture. but the Australian way of life as it is pretty defined by a certain thing that some people definitely don't fit in, including in a lot of areas Aboriginal people and the original people of this space. So I think that sort of is something to consider through our argument.
Thank you for that. What we are debating is whether cultural diversity is a threat to the Australian way of life, and considering that we all have a diversity, at the end of the day, it's, do you consider that as a threat? Because the truth is, and you know that deep inside, you and your cultural diversity, no way is a threat, because we know the definition of diversity. It's not just about your name or your religion, your race, and you mentioned marriage equality. It's about the person you are, your roots, where you come from. And when you consider that as a threat to Australia, being here as a young person, the first black African AFL coach, I don't consider that as a threat to Australian, AFL, it's an Australian sport. I'm coaching young people. There's no way that's a threat, so just putting it out there.
Alrighty. Alrighty, have we got any more questions? I've got you all here, and each one of you schools is going to ask a question. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day.
Hello? Okay. So I have 2 questions. Firstly, in what way would you define culture in our modern society? Just out of interest, because it could be relative to the way that you define it could alter the question in itself. And secondly, I'd like to ask, to what extent do you agree with the statement that Australia, or Australian society, or Australian way of life, we select the cultures that are seen as acceptable, that are seen as, that we decide to integrate into our way of life? To what extent do you think Australians are selective with the cultures that we agree with and accept and tolerate in our modern day? Thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you for your question. The first part of your question, you asked, what do we define as culture? And I think culture can't be limited to any one sort of thing. That's why we wanted to bring in the gender aspect of culture. We didn't talk about we did talk about the sexuality part of it, but also it is intersectional. It's gender, it's physical ability, it's the sexuality that you identify with, it's your religion, it's your ethnicity, it's so many different things. And I think in the context of this conversation, it's important to acknowledge the many facets of cultural identities. In relation to the second part of your question, talking about the Australian way of life and whether we are to a degree selective about the people that we bring into this country, I would say that it wouldn't be critical to assume that we aren't selective. To a degree, we have to be selective. There are screening processes. And I do think that the Australian government is selective about the people that they let into this country. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such a rigid immigration system. I think the way that Australia has been for a very long time, it's very heteronormative. There's a particular kind of way that's been really been solidified into the Australian culture. And so the people that are in power who aren't diverse and do have a lot of power over immigration, they're the ones that might take cultural diversity for granted because they've always had power and they've always been comfortable where they are because they've never been persecuted. So yes, I do think the Australian government is selective with who they bring into this country, and I don't support that. Thank you.
We've got one up here. Okay. Okay, so just before we move on to the next question, I just want to, Bella and I just want to quickly just discuss what you were just talking about and a quick definition of culture. So, so the way that we would define culture is your culture is you. It is every aspect of yourself, and it is your location, it is your background, your traditions, it's the way you eat, it's the way you, your attitudes you hold, your beliefs. You know, that's what your culture is, and I just wanted to highlight that for you, and I'll pass you over to Bella.
Okay, I want to have raise of hands if you guys have an iPhone.
Everyone has an iPhone.
Seriously, like, not. So you guys are non-iPhone users? Oh, great, good, very honest. All right, so the Australian way of life. Okay, it's very broad, you know, but you know, when you come to Australia, there's laws which are introduced by the government, and this is all political stuff. But how many of you actually express yourself? Like, you know, do you dance? Do you sing? Put your hands up if you dance, sing, you know, do all the creative stuff a part of you. That's a lie. Come on, guys. Okay, seriously. Does culture have an influence on that? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to give you quick stats. So, as you know, there's in Australia we've got trade partners, and those are from outside Australia. And I mentioned iPhones. Do you know where that's produced? China, right? Yes, they produce iPhones, but what if we didn't have a partnership with them? Would you guys have iPhones? No? Would you? I'm talking about trade here, like importing the goods here and so on. So there's 5 top countries, and I list them. So China, the United States of America, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and Thailand. Now, Australia has gained, and this is from the trade website, so it's credible sources, $352.7 billion. That's a massive contribution to the Australian economy. Now, when we talk about the Australian way of life, considering that we've got a citizen process in place, like we all have to apply, right? And that was introduced by the Howard government, and that was to reassure that, you know, you don't just, because back in the days it used to be you come in the country and you're just an Australian. Well, now you have to prove yourself, which is understandable. And yes, it's selective, but it's a moving government, like we're getting there. But the fact that, you know, we're coming to a foreign land, particularly refugees, and I would like to tell you the difference. So there's refugees, there's asylum seekers, and there's migrants. So migrants come to Australia purely to get a better life, as well as run businesses and so on. Refugees, yes, and it might have not been mentioned by you guys, the government contributes a lot to bringing refugees to Australia, but imagine if you were one of those refugees and you came to Australia and you were in a crisis. Wouldn't you really appreciate that? And wouldn't you try your best when you come to Australia to integrate? But also, let's think about the laws for a minute. We have to pay bills, right? And where does that money go? To the Australia, right? Australia? Like bills, tax, and all that. So you guys are gonna get old enough and you're gonna pay all that. So when we talk about the way of life, the Australian way of life, as people from a different background, we're actually doing all these things by force. No choice. So we're not a threat at the end of the day. So I'm just saying. Thank you.
Now, I think we've got one more question and one up there. We'll have to keep the answer short, guys, this time, because we are having the judges coming back in a moment, and we do want to find out the results before the schools have got to go. So, who is first one up?
Okay, so I don't really know how to word this, but so just bear with me. My impression of the Australian way of life is just like going to the beach, going to Bunnings, doing stuff. You know, I'm really struggling to see how your culture, your where you're from, your race, blah, 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 fits into that. And I just want you to kind of explain what you define, like what you think exactly is being threatened by cultural diversity.
Well, Oh, is that on? Hi. Great question. I guess the point that we're making is that if cultural diversity was truly happening in Australia and truly accepted, then it wouldn't just be Australian norms that is the Australian way of life. It would be a much broader way of life. So we would be appreciating and bringing in all the different cultures, not just sort of acknowledging that they're there. We do have a very multicultural society. We're not denying that at all. But the Australian way of life is beers, barbecues, beaches. It's all the Australian norms that have been that way for a really long time. Yeah, made by the white people who came and decided that was the Australian way of life. So there hasn't really been an integration or a change necessarily, like a large-scale change that includes different cultures into this Australian way of life. I'm not saying that different cultures can't participate, because we all are participating, but it's not changing based on all of the various cultures that are coming in, if that makes sense.
Sorry, just to quickly make a comment about that. Just going back to what I spoke about with our definition of Australian way of life, and just remember there is a document given to each and every person moving to Australia that highlights key values of Australia that Australia holds. And these things are things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, it's equality for gender. The things that our government is presenting to people coming here or anyone who would like to read this, these are broad things. We're not just excluding anyone out of them, and these are things that every human being can relate to. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Awesome. Okay. And we have one last question, I believe. Who is that?
Just asking, have you ever felt racism?
Yeah. Racism. I think all of us, to some degree, have experienced some degree of discrimination. Even though I'm a white woman, I'm Jewish. I've experienced anti-Semitism. My family has. I think every single one of us, to some degree, has experienced racism and discrimination, and that comes into our debate, and we're saying how much can actually change within the system that we're living in. Yes, people are allowed in, yes, there's a broad definition of Australianness, but there's still underlying cultural systems that subtly discriminate against people. And I think to a degree we've all, and a lot of the people in the audience, have experienced that.
All righty. Well, thank you all for your comments, and apologies to those who didn't get a chance to talk, but I get a feeling that mightn't be very many of yous. Oh, it's you up there. I'm sorry, man. Sorry, bro. Before they do give the judges' results, I'd like to get a show of hands so we can see who you think argued their point better. So firstly, can I have a show of hands starting with Team 2 who argued cultural diversity is a threat? That's this side. Okay. And can I get a show of hands for Team 1 arguing diversity is not a threat? That seems pretty well split, actually. Okay, so it's time to hear our judges' decisions and their remarks. So can you please welcome our judges back to the stage?
I think we're using the royal we because I am the only judge who is now on this stage. So my name's Justine Dandy and I'm from ECU, and I've been given the job of allowing a summary of our discussion. And it was quite a vigorous discussion. It was a difficult thing to assess, and we must congratulate all team members, and including the support members, on a really, really good effort. And it's a difficult topic. Not just because it's kind of a controversial topic, but also because it contains some very complex and loaded kind of constructs. What is cultural diversity, and what is the Australian way of life, and indeed what is threat? And each team kind of addressed those in different ways, and that was a really interesting experience because they did actually tackle it from different perspectives. So I just pop my glasses on so I can read my scroll here. There were strengths and weaknesses to both sets of arguments, and I'm not going to necessarily focus on particular speakers, as I just kind of give an overview of our discussion about the arguments overall. If we look at Team 1, who argued that Australian diversity was not a threat, we felt that they made quite good use of evidence, and we're always, we're all academics in our team, so we're all looking for evidence to support the arguments, not just a convincing story or a kind of dazzling presentation, but what is the evidence that's going to support their case. And they did that through a range of things, including economic contributions of people from diverse backgrounds and also through the sporting examples. We did, however, wonder about the economic contributions and whether that is a particular kind of lens through which to assess people's contributions to the Australian way of life. And is that actually a kind of fair lens to assess contributions? Is that in fact a very kind of dominant perspective or a white lens to evaluate how people contribute to the Australian way of life? So we wondered a little bit about that one. We thought that the activity was really a good one and demonstrated the diversity in the room, at least in terms of people born overseas, which is not necessarily the same as cultural diversity. So we thought that was, it was nice to have that activity and to show that amongst the audience, but it needed to be taken a little bit further in terms of the argument. What does that add to the argument, the fact that so many people were here are from different places? So those were some of the strengths and weaknesses of Team 1 negative, and if I've missed anything, my fellow judges can help me. Team 2 completely bamboozled me, and in a good way. I'm not often bamboozled actually, by redefining the argument in a sense, and they put it in a way that was almost on the same as the other side, by redefining what we meant by the Australian way of life, defining it in very much a kind of white, as a white construction, a white sort of sense of the way of life. And that was a really interesting way to do it, although I did think it was a little bit cheeky, as I felt like it was kind of it was sort of reversing the argument in a sense, but it's a difficult topic to engage with, and perhaps that was the best way to do it. In doing that, they then had to argue for that it's a good thing to challenge that white way of life. And they did that really quite convincingly. And I think one of the strengths of Team 2's argument was the coherence across the three speakers. They had quite a strong theme across the three speakers, which they maintained. And we also liked their broader definition of diversity, that they brought in issues around sexism and heterosexism at the beginning that kind of gave us a broader understanding of diversity and the problems with diversity and how we live with diversity in Australia. And we also thought that thinking and juxtaposing the traditional Aboriginal ways of life with what we might now think of as a white Australian way of life was a really interesting tactic there. So on balance, we did, and you can see where I'm going by the way I'm saying it, we did think that Team 2 won the debate, but it was quite a difficult difficult decision for us to make. So we had trouble coming up with that, but I can see from the popular vote that most of you thought so too. I would, in conclusion, though, like to say how very impressed we were with all of the debaters. I thought you did an excellent job, and you might think sitting in the audience that it's quite easy, but for them to get up and do this in front of you was really quite a challenging task. So I would like you to thank once again the efforts that they put in as presenters. And we look forward to some of you guys in the audience in the future being on those debate teams. So thank you very much for your time.
All righty. So I realise we didn't get to everyone's questions, and as I said, my eyesight's awful, so apologies I didn't spot you up there and so on. Good news is, that's it for today. So thank you all for coming. I realise most of you didn't probably have a choice, but you were still a great audience, so give yourself a round of applause. Now, our panellists are each going to receive a commendation from the Office of Multicultural Interests for their involvement today, and the video of today's debate will be available on their website. That's omi.wa.gov.au. Can we have one last round of applause for our panellists and judges? It was a very difficult topic for both teams. You did exceptionally well, so please feel proud of yourselves. Lastly, teachers, I'm going to hark on it again, but if you do get a chance, please check out SPS Learn. If any of you want to have a chat to me about it, well, see me after class. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.